We'd like to believe that we are good people. We'd like to believe we have a solid understanding of why we're in the place we are in life. We'd like to believe that we know the contents of our heart. Question, though, is how well do we really know ourselves? Sure, I could say that I'm a good person, or I could say that I understand what the levers were that led to a failed relationship or a bad turn in business or something else like that. But often there's things about our character that we don't necessarily know. We don't necessarily think about them. We assume that we have the full picture because we think we know everything about our own lives. And yet, quite often, that's not really the case. It's sort of like if you're driving down the road and you decide that you want to look at your cell phone while you're driving. And you think to yourself, well, I can keep an eye on the road and I can look at my cell phone all at the same time. The reason why that's so dangerous is because the reality is when you're looking at the phone, you're not looking at the road out of the corner of your eye. You're not looking at anything. You're 100% relying on your mind, which creates a sort of a 3D reconstruction of the environment you're in. And it works, assuming nothing unexpected happens. If you know that the road is long and straight before you, then you could totally look at your cell phone for a couple of seconds to check a message or something. And your mind is going to keep you on autopilot, navigating your vehicle down that straight, predictable path. But what happens when a pedestrian walks out in front of you unexpectedly or an animal runs across the road? Well, that wasn't part of the calculus. And so you could get into a really bad accident thinking that you were in control. And that's kind of the same thing in our lives when we look over our personal flaws and weaknesses and things. We look at our lives and we think, well, I know why, like, for example, why did my wife and I not work out? What was the root cause? Well, I think I have a pretty solid understanding of what happened. But what do you think she would have to say? If I could look at the entire experience, not through my lens, but through hers, what would she have to say? Would our stories line up? And quite often we tend to say, well, if someone disagrees with me and their perspective is different, it's because they're slimy or they are ill-intentioned or they're liars or something like that. But quite often, it's just our perception of ourselves tends to be warped when we have something that's a little bit maybe wrong in our lives or something that is a flaw in our character. We're inclined not to pay attention to it, not to necessarily see it as a really big deal. When other people have flaws, we can see those very well. But when there's something wrong with our character, we don't necessarily want to see it. I was sitting around last night talking to my neighbor. My neighbor lives in the same building, and we talk just because he likes to go outside and have a smoke, and I can't really avoid him sometimes. You walk out the door, and there he is. And so we'll talk for a minute. And yesterday, he was there, and I was going out, thought I was going to go for my evening walk. And he was like, hey, could you help me with this smartwatch I got? So I was like, sure, let's take a look at it. So he wanted me to look at the smartwatch, and we helped get it configured and set up. And then we were just, bullshitting, and the evening turned into the early hours of the morning because we're just a couple of guys with nothing going on in life. So it turns out, just easy to wind up just talking about life and whatever. And he was talking about his life story and his path of trying to be sober and different things of that nature that are, his path. But we started talking about money, and then we started talking about relationships that we'd had that didn't work out. And, he was talking about what had led to, his wife and him not working out. And I was sharing kind of the details about what it was that had led to my divorce a few years ago. And then, as I went through this, I was talking about how, I guess communication is the biggest breakdown. And I would definitely stand by that. Communication, when everyone kind of withdraws into their own little world and they don't talk to each other and they assume what other people are thinking and they don't talk directly, honestly, and candidly. That's one of the biggest, most dangerous things you can do in a relationship. It's not that anyone in the relationship does anything really, really bad. It's just there's a point when you talk about something and it just doesn't seem like it's worth talking about anymore. So you just don't talk at all. And that leads to erosion of trust. And then that leads to the end of the romance and the end of the relationship, because you're not really communicating anymore. So I think communication is really the big elephant in the room. That's the thing that's the most important. And then trust, trust that you can know someone else, your partner, is going to keep their word and follow through, and they're not going to say they're going to do something and then do something completely different. Knowing that you have a level of consistency there, I think that's important. But then again, communication again goes back to fix a lot of flaws, because if there's problems and everyone feels super comfortable bringing up their concerns and talking about things and listening and all of that sort of thing, then you can navigate through just about anything. But when you stop talking, that's really what leads to erosion of a relationship. But then we were talking about money and how, I think for me, being in a relationship where I couldn't trust my spouse to make good financial decisions, that was definitely a negative lever in our relationship. And it wasn't really about how much money we had in our bank account. It was about whether we could trust each other. Like, could I put her on a joint account and just trust that whatever decisions she would make would be healthy decisions, or would, if we shared a bank account, would, there'd just be no money tomorrow because, there was a sale at Ross or something. I don't know, like that was a thing in our relationship that was a detractor, just not really having the trust financially. I wanted to be in a place where I could trust my wife to have full access to all of our accounts and just put them all together and, and be able to do that. And it turned out, like it just never really worked out that way. It started to feel like there was always, there's always a tendency for money to disappear if it ever made it into my late wife's hands. And that was frustrating to me, because, like if you can't put money somewhere and just know it's going to be there because if it's available, it's going to be spent, then, how do you have those bigger conversations about, let's have a kid and, put them through school and stuff? Because like we can't even get past the, how do we be a good steward of a few $100s here and there, right? So like that was kind of a part of the calculus, and me and this gentleman were talking about all of it. And, and then he stopped and he said, hey, the thing is, maybe you're just a very materialistic person, because he's like, I have, less than $200 of net worth in my entire life, and, it doesn't matter. Money just doesn't matter at all. Well, I think that is where I would probably disagree with this man. I don't disagree with him in spirit, but I do disagree that, it's okay or healthy or wise to live your life having no money, just being, paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth, and, you don't save anything, you don't have any rainy day fund, you don't have any plan for retirement, you don't do anything other than just, if you get some money, then, it's fine for it just to be gone. And that's a difference in perspective that, I would have between me and this other man I was talking to, which is fine. But, then I was thinking about how, I guess I was a little bit taken aback. I was taken aback. And we were having a good conversation. I enjoyed the conversation. But I was just taken aback by the perspective that this man would have to say, to describe me as being a more of a materialistic person. And I guess the reason why I'm taken aback by it is because in my life as a broader whole, I tend to see myself as the opposite of materialistic. I drive a car that's, worth $1,000. I walk to work almost every day. I don't really spend money lavishly. I feel like my life is pretty simple. Now, there are some things I will spend money on, not gonna lie. I'll spend money on computer hardware. I'll spend money on, some trinkets I want for my shelf to decorate, or, off of Amazon or something. I'm a sucker for gaming memorabilia and various other things of that nature. So I'm not going to say that I'm an extremely Spartan person who's just, living like a Tibetan monk in a monastery or anything like that. But by and large, I have a job where I tend to work with fairly high net worth individuals. It's just, when you're a support staff for people who make six-figure incomes, it doesn't mean that I'm rich, doesn't mean that I make a lot of money per se, but I'm in the circle to a point at work of people who make a lot of money. You're talking like, between $100,000 and $400,000 a year salaries, right? Probably, in the world that I work in, if you make under $100,000, you're, basically some sort of chump change that's not even worth being acknowledged, right? That's just kind of how it is. So in my broader circles, I would always be looked at in general as a person who, it doesn't matter what my bank account says. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what I do. Like, I'm basically just, not going to be part of the circles of those high wealth people, right? I make an okay salary, I think. I feel satisfied with it, but it's, it's under $100,000 a year. And, then, people I know, they're, they'll buy a house like it's nothing, just go down and get a house. Okay. I don't know if I'll, be able to get a house. Maybe I could if it was a affordable market, but, that's kind of neither here nor there. But the point I'm getting at is, in society, I think it's interesting how, like, I could look at myself as a person who's not very materialistic, but then someone else, someone else who has, less net worth, someone else who has less, someone else who doesn't, quite maybe have what I have. I don't think of myself as being, doing really well, but the reality is, from the perspective of someone else, maybe I am a materialistic person who's, all about the money, right? Like, doesn't matter how much you have. It's about the disparity between people, right? Because maybe there's a guy who's got $200 to his name, but he's got an apartment to live in, he's got a car to drive. The guy that's living under a bridge around the corner, who doesn't have anything, who doesn't even have food to eat, well, that guy living in the apartment is a rich guy. right? To the person who's making $400,000 a year, the person that's making $100,000 a year is just a peasant. It's all about perspective. It's all about, I guess, maybe in some ways, division of classes. Because people, somebody said once, it doesn't make a difference if you're a little smarter than somebody or a lot smarter. All they really know is you're smarter. It's like that, when somebody comes and they find me and they say, hey, you're techie, right? Can you help me with my computer? That happens. And the reality is I'm not really techie. I don't know very much about computers. I mean, I kind of do compared to probably them, but I'm not any sort of a super informed person in the space of computers. It's not my career. It's not my job. It's not something that I'm extremely proficient at per se. I'm just fluent in it. But to the person who's not fluent in it, it doesn't make a difference, right? If you're that old person who wants help setting up your cell phone, well, I'm an expert to them, right? These are the kinds of things where I just think perspective is such an important thing, and the way we see ourselves is quite often not the way other people see us. Sometimes other people are unfair. Sometimes people create unnecessary divisions between each other. Sometimes, though, maybe all of those differences in perspective are actually a reflection of the fact we need to look inside ourselves, though, too. We need to say, what is the truth of my nature? What is the truth of my life? Am I the right kind of a person, or am I a person who is good in my own eyes? And I guess it comes back to communication once again. Do we talk about things? Do we have open conversations, candidly discussing the truth of matters before us? Or do we filter things, omit things? And maybe we don't want to offend someone, so we just leave out the truth. Kind of like that conversation I was having last night. Start talking about money. Well, when this guy tells me he has only $200 to his name, well, that does not seem like the time or the place or prudence for me to say, well, here's what my bank account looks like. I have no desire to do that, right? But by the same measure, though, we kind of live our lives omitting things and not being completely transparent about what we think of others. We think critical things of people, but we don't necessarily tell them that. We judge them, but we don't necessarily tell them that. We don't necessarily do a very good job of communicating when we feel like there's something for good or bad in the lives of others. And so we get this warped perception of ourselves, warped perception of other people. And everyone has their headcanon of what others are all about. But it's often wrong. And just as other people can look at us and they can have a point of view that we would say is probably not completely fair, we also often look at ourselves and we have a perspective of our own lives, which is either too harsh or not harsh enough. I think it's important to do an honest retrospective and accept the fact that there's going to be things you believe about yourself which are just not true. Or maybe they're partially true, but not completely. It's important to remember that what we think we know isn't always on target. And then be willing to take into consideration the fact that maybe, even if we think that we've done well, or we've done what is right from the perspective of someone else, maybe we're part of the problem too. There's always a way to be more sensitive to others, to be more inclusive of others, to be more understanding. And I think it's important for us to try to do that, to extend the olive branch, to find a way to build a bridge instead of just saying, well, I'm right and other people are, getting it wrong. The more we can respect other people, the more we can be critical of ourselves within reason, the better we'll be at finding the truth, seeing the truth of ourselves. And if we can do that, then, well, it was Judge Learned Hand who said, the spirit of wisdom is the spirit that is not too certain that it is right. And I guess that sums it all up in a nutshell. How certain are we that we are right? And the more righteous you are, generally, the less sure you will be. As always, good luck on your adventure. Till next time, thanks so much for watching.